B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, June 8th, 2018. A New York Times reporter has revealed that her telephone and email records have been grabbed by prosecutors. This happened back in February. And the New York Times is curiously downplaying this infringement on the rights of reporters. And I can't explain why. So the details are that a reporter named Ali Watkins, a woman who was hired by the Times in 2017, she used to work for Politico and BuzzFeed, she has been the subject of an investigation. Now, she had a romantic relationship with an Intelligence Committee, Senate Intelligence Committee staffer named James A. Wolfe for about 3 years, and we're told it ended around the end of 2017. Mr. Wolfe is the subject of a leak investigation. And we've been expecting this for some time because the unprecedented level of leaking from the Trump White House and the Trump administration, not to mention the leaks that fuel the Russiagate narrative, well, it's been a problem. And they've been investigating, and finally, we learn that they have identified this guy as a suspect who may have leaked information about whether Carter Page was going to testify on a given day at the Senate Intelligence Committee. So as a part of that, they investigated Ali Watkins, and they have grabbed years of the metadata. We're told they haven't listened to the phone calls or read her emails, but they've gathered the metadata from years, going back to when she was in graduate school. That appears to be about 6 years' worth of coverage. And the New York Times, which was appropriately outraged when James Risen was working there, and he was the subject of a punitive investigation during the Obama administration where they invoked the Espionage Act and threatened to jail James Risen. But in this case, the Times published it buried deep in the front section of the paper today on page A17. It does appear on the homepage of the Times website, but it's not a top story. And the posture of the report is quite neutral here. The Times is not invoking any attack on the institution, the Gray Lady itself. They appear to be fairly detached about the way they're approaching this. And I comment on that because it is so unusual. And the invective that is hurled back and forth between the Times and the Trump White House would lead me to expect a little bit more dramatic presentation. So the best coverage I've seen so far is from the young reporter Kevin Gosztola at shadowproof.com. And in just 4 pages, he summarizes the history and correctly identifies Barack Obama as the man who opened the door to this kind of one-sided and excessive crackdown on reporters for leaks. And he gives a little bit of the history of the crackdown during the Obama years. And shifting to this case, he says FBI agents initially approached Watkins about the relationship she had with Wolfe, saying they were investigating unauthorized leaks. The Justice Department told her in a letter sent in February. But the Times says they only learned about it on Thursday, and there was a curious resolution passed in the Senate late on Wednesday acknowledging that they were going to cough up records in an unnamed ongoing investigation. So Wolfe worked as the security director of the committee for 30 years, and he was considered trusted by both parties. And there also, in the indictment of Wolfe, are references to additional reporters in addition to Watkins. They're identified only as Reporter 3 and Reporter 4. And it appears they got a hold of what were considered encrypted communications using WhatsApp. We don't know the method that was used to obtain those so far. And Gosztola correctly notes that the Attorney General, Eric Holder, and the Obama administration did lasting damage to reporters' freedom by continuing to pursue a subpoena against James Risen to force him to testify against the former CIA whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling, who had been accused of a leak. And Sterling was convicted based solely on the metadata. The fact that there were calls back and forth between him and Risen appeared to be sufficient for the jury to reach a verdict, which I find quite problematic. There's a pretty good comment on it, too, from Margaret Sullivan. She is now the media columnist of the Washington Post. She served a term as the public editor of the New York Times, and I guess they don't have one anymore. I haven't seen any commentary from a public editor in recent months. At any rate, Sullivan notes that the Trump administration has been all too clear about its scorn for press rights, and that Trump himself has speculated about locking up reporters. Even Jim Comey, when he was trying to kiss Trump's ass before he got fired, said that he hated leakers and he wanted to, what did he say, put a head on a pike? I think that's what he said. Anyway, Sullivan notes that this is courtesy of Barack Obama, who once claimed he'd be the most transparent president ever, but proved to be no friend to press rights. And she quotes Watkins' former employer, BuzzFeed editor Ben Smith. He said, "This looks like a case of law enforcement interfering with a reporter's constitutional right to gather information about her government." And like Gostola, Sullivan notes what happened under Obama set an ominous tone for reporters who were trying to do their jobs of informing the public. So did the Obama administration's record-breaking use of an arcane century-old law, the Espionage Act, which it used 9 times to pursue leakers. And then she quotes the aggrieved Risen, who now works at The Intercept and has a bit of a mixed record over there. Quote, "If Trump decides as president to throw a whistleblower in jail for trying to talk to a reporter, or gets the FBI to spy on a journalist, he will have one man to thank for bequeathing him such expansive power: Barack Obama." Well, I agree with Risen in this case. Now, another completely separate hack, or leak, is being reported and blamed on the Chinese government. And I say blamed because this news account in the Washington Post flatly states that it's China and attributes it to unnamed American officials. Quote, "Chinese government hackers have compromised the computers of a Navy contractor, stealing massive amounts of highly sensitive data related to undersea warfare, including secret plans to develop a supersonic anti-ship missile for use on U.S. submarines that could be deployed as soon as 2020. Now, they're not naming the contractor, and it's clearly not an individual, it is a firm. They say it is headquartered in Newport, Rhode Island, and that is a center of submarine warfare, both in Newport at the War College and Groton, Connecticut, where, the Electric Boat Works is located. So we don't know the name of this contractor. We're told a massive amount of data, 614 gigabytes, was stolen. And again, this is being attributed to China. But, as we note in the latest dispatch at consortiumnews.com, from our friend Ray McGovern, the former CIA analyst turned honest man, he starts by saying that the evidence of a Russian hack of the DNC is still unavailable, and suggests that it may not exist. And he goes into detail about the theft of Vault 7 from the control of the CIA and the NSA. Vault 7 contained these hacking tools that allow hackers to blame a hack on somebody else, to leave a trail, a digital trail, that looks like, say, China hacked it when maybe it was Russia, or could be any place. So I take at face value these claims that China is responsible, but I think we have to be skeptical about all of these claims because you and I will never have access to the so-called evidence. So McGovern goes on to talk about the claims that WikiLeaks got the information that was hacked by Russian agents, and he notes that this happened just the first release of Clinton emails from the DNC occurred just 6 weeks before the Democratic National, the emails were published just 3 days before the convention began, and he describes it as a magnificent diversion, drawing attention away from the substance of the emails by blaming Russia for their release. And he notes that one of Clinton's top PR people, Jennifer Palmieri, later admitted that she golf carted around to various media outlets at the convention with instructions to get the press to focus on something even we found difficult to process. The prospect that Russia had not only hacked and stolen emails from the DNC, but it had done so to help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. And McGovern goes into detail about the investigation that was reviewed by Bill Binney, the former technical director of the NSA, concluding that the hack of the DNC on July 5th of 2016, attributed to Guccifer 2.0, was not a hack, but it was an insider access of the information, which was transferred at a high rate of speed to a thumb drive or other external storage device. And he also notes that in Vault 7 was a program called Marble Framework, that Marble was designed for flexible and easy-to-use obfuscation, and that Marble source code includes a deobfuscator to reverse CIA obfuscation. Now, what this means is that in the end, if it was an American intelligence agency that hacked into the DNC or that stole the information and handed it off to WikiLeaks and then created a trail to blame it on Russia, that there may actually be a digital trail of those activities. Ray's an amazing guy. Bob Mueller, the special counsel, has added new charges against Paul Manafort, new obstruction of justice, and he has named Manafort's longtime business associate, Konstantin Kilimnik, as a co-conspirator, charging him with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to obstruct. And this has to do with the alleged witness tampering, as Manafort and Kilimnik try to persuade two people likely to be contacted by Mueller to lie about the lobbying that had been done for the Yanukovych government in Ukraine, from which Manafort earned millions of dollars. Or maybe we should say he was paid. Earned might be a little too tall. Anyway, these guys were hired by Manafort, their European former leaders or diplomats, and $2.5 million almost was used to fund this operation. And the critical issue is that they did do work in the United States. They coordinated with the Podesta Group, yes, they did, to advance the interests of the Yanukovych government. And by operating in the United States, they violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is just one of the counts against Manafort. And we have yet to see a count against Manafort related to collusion with Russians in the management of the Trump campaign. It may be there, but we haven't seen it. Every day I pause to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. There are a lot of great people who listen and support me, and I'm really grateful to you. Carla Mahoney is a stalwart. Ted Kelly's been at it for a while. Candace Brunlinger just took out an annual subscription. Thank you, Candace. And Michael Petty just renewed his annual. I'm grateful to each of you. I need more people to support my work. There have been some defectors lately, and I'm not sure if it's something I said or just something going on in that person's life. But I invite you to step up and subscribe today. Just visit peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll land on the sign-up page, and bingo, in just a couple of minutes, you can have your very own subscription. And if you prefer to use the U.S. mail and avoid PayPal, my mailing address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Well, our petty and petulant president is embarrassing us again in an international forum. In the beautiful wilds of Quebec in Canada, they're holding the G7 summit. You may scratch your head and say, didn't we used to call that the G8? And yes, we did. And Trump noted that today as he poked the eyes of all of the other assembled leaders except the new cat from Italy by saying, hey, why isn't Russia here? Russia should be at the table. Russia should come back in. We should have Russia at the negotiating table because we have a world to run. And this is the coziness that Trump exhibits about Putin that gives everybody the creeps, including me, who doesn't buy into the whole Russiagate narrative. And I believe that Trump is corrupt, and I believe that there are Russian elements to his corruption, some of which are not all in view. It doesn't amount to manipulation of the 2016 election, but this is just another curious example of Trump's love for Russia at the expense of others. And, of course, Theresa May, who somehow wrangled Trump into the booting of Russian diplomats as part of the phony, the unproven claim that Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned by Russians who applied a Russian nerve agent to their doorknob in Salisbury, England. So this, of course, makes the meeting very uncomfortable, and Trump has already telegraphed his petulance in advance, saying that he'll be leaving the meeting early. It doesn't appear that his travel schedule to Singapore requires that, but that's what he's doing, and it's just more embarrassment that really underscores the isolation that he is putting the United States into. And the tariff, the trade war that he has started that riles all of our allies who are part of the G7, well, a White House economic analysis of the trade agenda concludes that Trump's tariffs will hurt American economic growth, at least in the short term. The findings from the White House Council of Economic Advisors have been circulated only internally and not publicly released, which means this is another one of those goddamn leaks. and I actually have a little sympathy for Trump, that he can't keep anything quiet in the White House. Even when Sarah Huckabee Sanders holds a meeting with her little group to stomp out leaks, the meeting gets leaked. At any rate, this is evidence that the people around Trump don't buy into the trade wars that he has launched, and they really seem to be uncomfortable about the uncertainty that he is injecting into international markets, into the supply chain for American manufacturers that he's bragging about bringing back. It's just incoherent. And everybody knows this emperor has no clothes, even people inside his White House. And here's another example where he's trying to create his own reality. He asserted yesterday that his decision to abandon the Iran nuclear deal has already curbed Iran's aggressive behavior. Now, he offered absolutely no evidence of this, and a check on, just the vital signs of Iran shows that not much has changed, except they've talked about building more of these nuclear enrichment devices, and they are clearly bristling at the efforts by Trump to demonize Iran and to bolt from the nuclear deal. And then Trump builds on this self-created reality and says that he thinks that this is going to help with the negotiations with Kim Jong-un. He said his willingness to walk away from the Iran deal would set the right tone for his negotiations with Kim. Now, again, this is irrational and just, cannot be explained in any sensible way. And this has led to the exposure of the internal struggle between the newest Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and John Bolton. And Pompeo strongly backs the diplomatic effort with North Korea, while Bolton wants to go in and blow them up. He didn't say that, but that's my estimation of his position. And Pompeo, acting like a diplomat, said, "Ambassador Bolton and I will disagree with great consistency over time. I'm confident, right? We're two individuals. We're each going to present our views." And here's a surprise. As Trump unloaded his bizarre stream of consciousness with a group of reporters before he flew to Quebec from the White House this morning, he mentioned in response to a question that he is likely to support a bill introduced by Senator Gardner, the Republican of Colorado, and Senator Warren, the Democrat of Massachusetts, to allow states to determine whether to legalize marijuana. And this would, in effect, end the federal prohibition on marijuana. It could loosen up the restrictions on banking regulations and other issues that plague the states that have legalized medical and adult use cannabis. And this is just another way that he has marginalized little Jeff Sessions, who's been out there talking about the demon weed and zero tolerance and a return to the old days. So that's a minor ray of sunshine in an otherwise bleak sky. And here comes another internal Trump administration fight that you got to just sit back and enjoy. Rudy 9/11 Giuliani has been in Israel. I don't know why, but he's been making public statements about Stormy Daniels. He said that he could speak, or he actually just spoke for Melania Trump. And he also stuck his nose into the North Korea talks. So Melania Trump, according to Rudy Giuliani, believes her husband regarding the Stormy Daniels affair. And the First Lady's office responded, "We don't believe Mrs. Trump has ever discussed her thoughts on anything with Mr. Giuliani." And this leaves open the question about whether she believes her husband's claims that I never slept with that porn star. And Giuliani went on in Israel to say, "I'm sorry, I don't respect a porn star the way I respect a career woman or a woman of substance or a woman who has a great respect for herself as a woman, blah, blah, blah." And this led Michael Avenatti, Stormy's lawyer. "My client should be celebrated for her courage, strength, and intelligence," he wrote on Twitter. "She's one of the most credible people I've ever met, regardless of gender, period. I would put her character up against Giuliani's any day of the week." Well, he doesn't have any. So that's not a fair fight. And to Mike Pompeo, well, Giuliani said that Kim Jong-un got back on his hands and knees and begged for it, the reinstatement of the meeting that Trump tried to cancel, which is exactly the position you want to put him in, said Giuliani. Now, Rudy has never pretended to be a diplomat, and he isn't. And this is just stupid. As Trump gets ready to go into these meetings with Kim Jong-un, to describe him as having been on his hands and knees, that just shows great ignorance of Asian culture, of Kim in particular, and of the sensitivities of these meetings. It is breathtaking. Today, I'm releasing to my subscribers a fresh, in-depth interview with Steve Horn. He's a talented young reporter who has shifted his beat. He used to report on the environment, pipelines, climate change for the Smog Blog. And now he's a reporter for criminal legal news and prison legal news. And I am linking to his latest story, which is about the way investigators used DNA and genealogical websites to track down the man they think is the Golden State Killer. And while closing cold cases is a good thing, the privacy and legal concerns related to using DNA that people have put up without offering it to law enforcement, these are critical issues. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with reporter Steve Horn.
Well, I think that the main concern that they raise is that this is, of course, an example of a high-profile, really violent criminal suspect in the Golden State Killer, or Joseph James DeAngelo. But the concern is that this could be used in a way that's for, more petty type crimes and maybe, crimes that maybe didn't really need to be prosecuted. And it's opening up a big sort of a wide web, you could say. It's unclear if this will. For now, it's these cold cases that seem to be centered around high-profile names, people like the Golden State Killer, the Zodiac Killer, for example, which is another California
San Francisco, yeah.
Right, yeah, and then there's the the one in Washington that I discussed. His name is Ray Earl Talbot, which is pretty high profile in that area in Washington State. So there's those examples. Zodiac killer, I should make clear, there's no leads yet, but it's just kind of been speculation that maybe these same techniques could solve that cold case.
Mm-hmm. I invite you to listen to the full interview with Steve Horn about the Golden State Killer and the use of DNA websites and investigations. And as I was wrapping up the interview, I asked Steve to comment on his shift from the Enviro beat to the criminal justice beat. And he surprised me with a comment about how in 2016 he felt limited in his reporting, that he couldn't be critical of the Obama administration or the Clinton candidacy because environmental journalism is tightly linked to Democratic funders. Here's that excerpt from our conversation.
And the other thing that I'll mention is about the environmental reporting and the environmental beat in the United States is, unfortunately, a lot of the work is kind of centered around the Democratic Party and kind of blaming a lot of stuff only on what the Republican Party has done, the climate change denial machine. And I think I was kind of unique in that I wrote a lot about what the Obama administration was doing from a very critical perspective, but it's a little hard to do. There's cases in 2016 where I was frustrated because I couldn't do more and do more critically on Hillary Clinton, and I was forced more to cover things critically about the Trump campaign, and that has a lot to do with how environmental journalism in this country and more broadly environmental work through the NGOs is funded. It's funded by a lot of foundations that have close ties with the Democratic Party, so you can't really be as critical. You have to be more carefully critical, I should say, of the Democrats. And so I was looking to kind of get out of that box.
Well, thank you for sharing that. A lot of people aren't aware of it, and I have sensed it, but nobody has articulated it quite the way you just did.
I appreciate. Yeah. I mean, it's just it's a reality, and there's a lot of shared funding in different outlets. So, but yeah, it's something that I was continuously frustrated by, and
I commend Steve Horn for honestly talking about the background issues of being an environmental journalist in America today. And that Democratic Party is meeting this weekend in Providence, Rhode Island, where one of the proposals is to restrict the superdelegates. They could not vote on the first ballot. They could endorse whoever they wanted. They can come to the convention. They can vote on other matters. But these 700 elected officials and party hacks, the people who were all in for Hillary before Bernie, showed that he could win against Trump. The people who I hold most responsible for the debacle of 2016, well, I'd like to see the whole category of superdelegate eliminated. But this compromise to block them from voting on the first ballot might be acceptable. So we'll see where that one goes. There's a really curious story that we're getting more details on. We don't know this guy's name, but he's described as born in the United States, but a citizen of Saudi Arabia where he was raised. He was captured by a militia in Syria last September and turned over to the American military, who's been holding him at a base in Iraq as an enemy combatant for about 9 months. But they've decided this guy's story apparently is right. He said he went to Syria to be a journalist, was arrested by the Islamic State, and then he worked for that group as a condition of being freed from prison. He was a hostage. But now the U.S. wants to just turn him out and let him loose in Syria or Iraq with the $4,000 in cash and the cell phone, or a new cell phone to replace the one that he had when he was taken into ISIS custody. And they're going to give him enough food for several days. He has rejected this release offer, and I can't blame him. Facebook in more hot water as they reveal that 14 million users who posted and thought they had clicked private on a post, those posts were actually made public. And if you know how Facebook works, you get to select, you just give it to friends and family, or do you share it with anybody who can look at your news feed? Well, they knew about the problem on May 22nd, but waited 16 days to disclose it. This is not going to sit well. And Facebook is hiring in Menlo Park. You looking for a gig? They are hiring news credibility specialists to fact-check content and try to eliminate fake news. I'd love to see the standards that they're using for that. And just down the road a piece in Surveillance Valley, Google has announced that it will not develop artificial intelligence weapons. But they're splitting the baby and saying they will continue to accept contracts from the Pentagon. This is a new, awaited policy statement on artificial intelligence. And they say that the new principles forbid the development of artificial intelligence weaponry, but Google will continue to work with the military in many other areas. On Monday, we'll release a podcast at whowhatwhy.org featuring Yasha Levine, the author of Surveillance Valley, who has some really pointed comments about Google's history as a military contractor and how this current episode, which led to protests, resignations by a dozen Googlers, and the faux move by Google saying, well, we won't renew this contract for Project Maven. That'll be Monday at whowhatwhy.org. And over the weekend, if you have some extra time, go to Who, What, Why and check out my latest podcast with Professor Serhiy Plokhý. He's at Harvard now, but he was in Ukraine where he grew up in 1986 when the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident occurred. And he argues in his new book, Chernobyl, The History of a Nuclear Catastrophe, that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster and the Soviet response to it led to an eco-nationalism movement in Ukraine, forced Mikhail Gorbachev to adopt glasnost or openness, and was a driving factor in the dissolution of the Soviet Union. I found Professor Plokhý's commentary fascinating, and the book is a riveting account of the incident at Chernobyl. Check it out, either in the podcast or go pick up the book. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube, and you can always send your comments to Peter at peterbcollins.com.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling